Hey, Chap. Hey, man. All right. So, I understand we have to use a microphone.
Okay. Check your phone numbers. Oh, good.
This Wi-Fi?
Yeah, there's the town of Vienna Wi-Fi. But it's easy to log in. I tried to show Kathy how to do. More than she has to. You're on taxi later and you drowning.
Okay, I know I've missed the math couple times if I wanted to. Okay, I'm going to do it. Good. How you doing? Good to see you. Yep.
Hey, how you guys doing?
Good.
Did you guys need a laptop at all?
I don't, but
For a presentation or anything?
I don't know.
No?
Good. Yeah. I actually swung by the beach. Yes, sir. Oh, okay. Absolutely. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that's good. You'll let me get stuff going. No, no, no. Okay. Let's do a few minutes and then. Okay. I'll do a few minutes and then we just. Do you have a pen? Yeah, I got a pen. Just keep it informal. I think the main thing is just pretty much. I was at a town hall for Vienna a couple weeks ago. Right. She did the way you know the county does their thing where we just sit in the dais and one person after another goes up and speaks. Oh, that's so boring. We sat there for about an hour and a half, 2 hours. Yeah, I got no interest in that. Every single person came up and said something, and the rest of us sat there. I didn't. I was trying to respond. Yeah, people want to hear from you. They're like, what do you think? So why don't we give everybody maybe 1 minute to settle down? It's 1:06 in the back of the room. I also understand that this is something that we haven't done before, at least Chap and I have not done before, which is we're going to have a webcasted slash televised town hall. That's what I was told. Is that true? Is that how this is going to work? And if so, then we're already late because people might have been tuning in at 1 o'clock. But anyway, hi everyone. I'm Delegate Keam, and of course our distinguished State Senator Chap Peterson is here. So we're going to start just in a couple minutes. If you want to, just less than a minute, if you want to make sure everybody that's outside can come back in, and if you want to grab a seat even closer up, that's certainly great. And we'll get started really soon.
Do we need to stand in a particular place to get
Yeah,
on
oh yeah.
TV?
What's the camera?
Where's the cameras?
Who's the IT person here? Who's the, is there an IT person? Is the one person walk around or do we have to? Oh, there's one.
It's gonna be like Blair Witch Project.
we're surrounded.
Do we need to stand in a particular?
We can do this. Wow, it's like Big Brother. Yeah. Are you want to sit on that?
Okay. First of all, welcome to the town of Vienna, and it's great to be here. I'm Chap Peterson, your state senator. I represent the 34th Senate District, which starts in Dunn-Loring and works its way west until it almost touches the Prince William County line. I tell people when I knock on doors, if I'm on the west side of my district, I get 6 extra seconds of daylight in the summertime. But it's great to be here, and of course I'm here with Mark, and we've been working together. I guess this is our 5th session together? Yeah. Wow, okay. So it's an honor to work with Mark. We work well together. Our staffs work well together, and obviously doing this town hall, we get to get everybody together. And this is kind of the Vienna-Oakton area, although obviously if we represent you, we represent you. But I did I did Fairfax City this morning, so that was a south of 66 crowd. This is the north of 66. But let me talk a little bit about our session. We started the session on January 8th. This is a 60-day session. The legislature, by the way, is a creature of the Virginia Constitution, and everything we do is controlled by the Constitution. This is what we call a biennial budget year, and so we actually will write the state budget this year, which will take effect for the next 2 years. And because of that, we're in session for 60 days, and we got to get all our business done, and we will adjourn on or about March 8th, and then we'll come back for what's called the veto session in April. And just very briefly, some of the big issues this year, and again, if you were in Fairfax, I'm rehashing, but we're going to be probably dealing with Medicaid expansion. That will be a huge issue with a large impact both for our taxpayers and our hospitals throughout the state. That's a big issue economically. Economic development is a big issue. Our unemployment in Virginia has risen incrementally till it's about 5.8%, almost 6%, so it's higher than it was a couple years ago, and certainly higher than it was 6 or 7 years ago. We've also had a slowdown in our rate of growth in Virginia, primarily due to sequestration and cutbacks in the federal government. So all that's had an impact on the state across the board. So economically, we've been a little bit stagnant. Now, again, our standard of living in Virginia is higher than the average state, and that's a good thing. But obviously, we need to keep creating jobs in order to stay in business. The final issue, and I am going to talk about this a good bit, is ethics reform. In case you were climbing Mount Everest over the past 6 months, we had a number of issues that accrued to us over the investigation of former Governor McDonnell, which is to some extent culminated in a 14-count indictment, which will later be tried to a federal jury in Richmond. Without prejudging any of those issues, and by the way, as a juror, I tend to be probably more skeptical than average person, but it has shed light on our ethics laws in Virginia, or lack thereof, and one of our goals this session is to try and make the process more open and transparent, and frankly, a little bit more strict than what we have right now. Right now, we have a very, what I call, laissez-faire system on being in office and reporting gifts, and there's no cap on gifts, there's no cap on contributions, and frankly, the presumption was that if you were in office, you would act in the best interest of the Commonwealth, but in the immortal words of Ronald Reagan, trust but verify, and we have very little verification right now. So those are some of the broader macro issues. I'm going to get into my legislation in a bit, but before I do, I'm going to turn it over to Mark, since he represents the House side. I represent the Senate side, and he can give his perspective on what's going on.
Thank you, Chap, and it's, again, great to see all of you. Thank you for making time out on probably the warmest day we've had this year, right? So this is great to see all of you. I'm actually seeing snow melt for the first time. Let me also first start by thanking the town council and the mayor and all the staff for opening up this facility today to let us be here to work with all of you and to hear from our constituents. And in particular, I'm just going to go from left to right. Edith Kelleher, our town councilwoman, thank you. I see Howard Springsteen right behind. I see Carrie over here, Carrie Zanicki. Do I see any other town council members here? Well, the town, Yeah, town manager, Mercury Payton, and today's Mercury is higher than last week's Mercury, so I'm glad that Mercury's making a difference. Okay, and I also wanted to just special recognition for our town mayor, who's obviously not here today, but her daughter Linda is back there, and I want to just say hi and thanks for all that you and your family have done for us all those years. And finally, I know we have somebody from Supervisor Hudgens' office. Yeah, you're back there as well, right? I don't think the county supervisor was able to stop by, but her office is here, so if you have any county questions, we have that. And we also have many of you, and I'm not going to name names because all of you do so much for this town, and also the surrounding area, but people like George and others who work on the town's Board of Zoning Appeals and on the town liaison offices. I want to thank you all for your service. The two of us have the chance to represent you in the General Assembly, and we try really hard to focus on the issues that matter to us. And sometimes they're peculiar bills that nobody else really cares about. They deal with zoning. Sometimes they're issues that deal with statewide implications. And then once in a while we deal with international issues as well. This year that we may mention that if somebody has a question about that. But we try really hard to connect with you. And so unlike other town halls that I've been to, this is a chance for us to, almost like a family. Imagine this being a family living room or a kitchen table. We want to hear from you what's going on. And even if it has nothing to do with the General Assembly or legislation, we just want to hear from you, because when we're down there in the General Assembly, it's kind of a little cocoon that we're in. You know, for 60 days, we hear from lobbyists all the time. We hear from folks that just come around and hang out, but we don't really get to hear directly from our constituents. And the few of you that actually do drive down, I know John Horsch and Sue and others who do drive down to meet with us, and Ned and others, it's really refreshing. But it's more important for us to come back here and hear directly from you, because we want to make sure what we're doing in the General Assembly, how we're voting, is relevant to what you're doing. So with that overview, let me just give you a couple of differences, if you will, from my perspective as somebody who's now starting my 5th year, that's different from the last 4 years I served. And I think Chap's been in the House and the Senate longer, and so he has a different perspective from working with different governors. But this is the first time that I'm working with a governor of my own party. In the last 4 years that I was in office, I was with Governor Bob McDonnell, and we worked together very closely. We worked across the aisle on a number of jobs issues, military veterans, some of the key issues that matter to us. And so I've enjoyed a good, strong relationship working with him. But the fact that he was a member of a different political party, and the fact that the House that I belonged to, the House out of 100 members, we had 67 Republicans in the majority, and I was in the minority party. What that meant was any bill that passed with 51 votes or more would become law, pretty much, unless the state Senate stepped up and was able to fix it. This time, the political environment has changed for me, at least, and not so much for Chap, and he can talk to you about what's going on in the state Senate. But the difference for me is that because we have a governor who's from my own political party, regardless of where you stand on issues, just from a pure practical perspective, what it means is that unless the majority party passes a bill with 67 votes, there's a chance that there's an extra layer of check and balance involved now, which is the veto power. And so because of that, I think my colleagues on both sides of the aisle understand that unless an issue becomes really super partisan and super political or complex and complicated, we ought to not get into the debate about, okay, well, start threatening people on veto and things like that. So it's added a different dynamic. It's hard to explain in words, but there's just a different political environment in the House than it was in the four years I've been in. Also, the other difference that's happened is we have had a tremendous turnover of membership just in the 4 years that I've been in office, 5 years now. When I was elected, many of you might remember, but we had to draw lots for the 21 freshman members that came down to Richmond. And unfortunately, I drew number 100. And so when I started the General Assembly career, I was number 100 out of 100. Today, I am number 43 out of 100. I'm sorry, not 43, 63. But the same class that I came in with, the person who drew number 81 at that time is now number 43, which means that 55 or 56 new members have been elected with my class and the one after that and this past year. What that means is more than half of the people in the General Assembly are fairly new. They're not as experienced. We have subcommittee chairmen who are in their second term. We have full committee chairmen who are in their second term. And so the lack of institutional memory and history means that there's less decorum, less history, less tradition. Therefore, I mean, in some ways it's good because you can try new things. In some ways it's bad because people will try something even though they know exactly what's going to happen, because they say, well, we haven't done it in a few years, let's go ahead and try it. So you're going to see some of those dynamics as well. All that means is that this year, being a new governor, Governor McAuliffe, and a bunch of new members in the House, and the Senate and Chap can probably talk about the politics of that, but the state Senate having gone from Republican majority to now a working Democratic majority, it means that this year you're not going to see major legislative reforms passing. You're not going to see some major bills happening. You're probably going to see a lot of small things happening and lots of debate about big issues. But just because of the way the voters, all of you, have chosen the government that you have in this last November election and the special election since then, we have a somewhat of a status quo a year, if you will. We have a split government. We have some checks and balances. And as a result, I don't think that you're going to see major reforms. Now, having said that, one of the things that Chap and I and most of us on at least our side of the aisle and some Republicans are supporting and really, really hoping will happen this year is Medicaid reform. Now, no matter how you view that issue, where you come from your political perspective, how you feel about what happened with President Obama's Affordable Health Care Act a couple of years ago, this is really about Virginia and our taxpayer money and taking care of those workers in Virginia that are uninsured, that can't afford to have health insurance. And so we've been working for a couple, 3 years now, and the governor is looking at various options, including legislative and executive options, to try to make expansion of the Medicaid and fill in the health care coverage gap his priority. Right now, the ball is pretty much in the Senate's court and the governor's court, because the House members, the leadership, have already said no way in the world this is going to happen this year. So we're going to see if we can work out an option that will get us to that goal. But that's probably the big issue that's happening above us. Otherwise, I'm happy to talk to you about education reform and all the other questions. And so let me turn this back to Chap, and then after that we'll open up to Q&As.
All right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about my own legislation, because that's kind of how I speak. Is I file bills, I argue bills, and I try and push forward initiatives. And by the way, not all of them pass, and the ones that tend to have the most dramatic and far-reaching impact, needless to say, are the ones that are most likely to fail. But you know, sometimes you're able to start a conversation that years later ends in a resolution. I give an example. In 2008, I brought a bill to repeal Sunday hunting ban in Virginia, which I think got maybe 2 votes in committee, and this year that will become reality. So anyways, here's some of the bills that I have this year, and these are what's still alive and still pushing forward. Senate Bill 222 is a bill I've carried for years, which essentially would, what I call the Solar Freedom Bill, essentially would allow homeowners to put solar panels on their houses as long as it's done in a way that's aesthetically acceptable, and not have any sort of blanket prohibition by HOAs or community associations. And from talking to folks in the solar industry, that is the #1 impediment to growing the industry in Virginia and growing that type of technology in Virginia is HOAs and community associations that ban them. And so basically what this would do would be, unless there was some type of ban that was actually in land records, in the recorded land deed of declaration, that those outright prohibitions would be unenforceable in Virginia. We got that passed through the Senate. We passed it through the Senate multiple times. This year we passed it through 40-0 with an amendment that I worked out with some representatives from the other side, and I'm hoping to get that through the House, and if so, that will be a major victory for folks on the clean energy side. Second bill I had that has been successful and gotten some hopefully positive attention was a bill originally brought to me by the Humane Society, and it's also supported by the state vets of Virginia, and that is a bill that essentially would have better consumer controls on pet stores. If you go to a pet store and buy an animal that's sick or diseased, right now you really have no right of action or cause or remedy or protection. This would basically be that if you bought an animal that was found to be sick or diseased within 14 days of purchasing that animal, you can either take the animal back or you can keep the animal and care for the animal and at least have a portion of your vet bills covered up to the purchase price of the animal. And I think this is important for a couple reasons. One being that pet stores are in a much better position to quality control and make sure animals are getting cared for on the front end. And so when you buy a pet, not only should you have that right as a consumer, but also it's better for pets and for animals in general that, again, that they're come from safe conditions and a safe environment. And this was a bill that, frankly, I expected to be controversial. I had some opponents in the dog breeders community, and we got a lot of support from across the board, and we actually passed it through the Senate Ag Committee 15-0, and that's mostly reps from rural areas, so it's not the touchy-feely crowd. And then we got it through the Senate 40-0, so that'll be coming over to the House. So those are two kind of a little bit offbeat issues, but successes, which I'm very proud of. Then I have another bill I'm kind of excited about, and it was a bill that I absolutely did not anticipate filing when I got down to Richmond, but an article in the Washington Post by my friend Tom Jackman kind of woke me up to it, and that is the issue of what they call LPRs, license plate readers. And basically, this is technology which captures information on license plate and stores that in a central database. And some localities in Virginia, including Arlington County and City of Alexandria, got Homeland Security grants, which allowed them to start install license plate readers on police cruisers, and they could go to then shopping malls or schools or where have you, and download all this information about whose car was parked where. And they've collected this huge data bank of information, which of course leads to the reaction of why? I mean, why are they collecting all this information? Why is this their business? They have no warrant for this information. There's no criminal investigation. Again, it's just sort of this expansion of government knowledge of what we do and why we do it that frankly is not necessary, in my opinion. And so I filed a bill, and there's a House bill on the other side by Rich Anderson, who's a Republican from Woodbridge, that would essentially put a control on governments keeping this database and using this database unless there was a pending criminal investigation. So my thought is that government should not just be sort of collecting wholesale information on citizens. There has to be a reason to do it. And I've actually got some good feedback from police chiefs. I think they're actually looking to get some guidance from us, that they have the technology to basically oversee all of us, but they're looking for some guidance from us on how to use that technology and what controls to have on that technology. And my bill hopefully is going to put those controls in place by basically saying that if they collect this data, unless there's a pending criminal investigation, that they have to purge it at least after a finite period of time. So those are that bill will be up in general laws on Monday. Those are three of the bills I'm carrying. I also have a whole package on ethics. And I'll spell here, I gave sort of a messianic sermon in Fairfax this morning, so I'll spare the emotion. But I will say this, that what's happened in Virginia I find troublesome. And I will tell you, when I was elected to the House in 2001, Vance Wilkins was a speaker at that point. And he was the meanest guy I'd ever met, okay? I mean, I was terrified of him. And the reason is when he first did the orientation, you could barely understand what he said. But he spoke to us, and I was a group of 25 freshmen. And he basically said, if you ever caught any of us taking something under the table or trading money for a vote, that he would personally come up to our office and pull us out of there and throw us out on the street. And honestly, I was scared. And to some extent, I'm still scared that you want to do the right thing, you want to represent your constituents, you want to be honest. Trust me, you don't want to be on the front page of the newspaper for the wrong reasons. And I feel like sometimes in Richmond, the culture has gotten to a point where it's kind of, well, what can I get away with, you know? And I feel like money has, frankly, too much influence, not just in politics, but especially in Richmond. It's gotten out of control, and there needs to be limits on gifts. In my opinion, there need to be limits on contributions. There needs to be more disclosure. And I don't want to see us just pass an ethics reform bill that's just window dressing. And if I think it is, I will vote against it. I got no problem voting against major legislation, okay? So I'm looking for us to accomplish something that's going to keep the system simple, make it open, but also have some major restrictions on what we do. Because Mark and I can tell you, we do this because we believe in what we're doing. We believe in democracy. We believe in the Commonwealth of Virginia. We want to see it succeed. And if people are in it for, because they want to elevate their standard of living, or they want somebody to pay for a wedding or something like that, get out. This ain't it. This isn't what you should be doing. And I feel strongly about that. And again, I'm not speaking as anyone that's a perfect person. I've had more than one occasion where a lobbyist has bought me a drink or maybe even a meal. And again, I'm not looking for sort of meals here and there or things like that. I'm talking about where people have become dependent on these types of gifts, and that's something we've got to do away with in Richmond. So that's sort of a brief overview, and I have basically 4 bills that I can get into if I get a question on kind of different aspects of ethics reform. One of those has already been killed. One of them may be killed on Monday, and the other 2 have been wrapped into a larger bill. So that's kind of what I'm up to. I've got some other legislation, which you all can ask about. I filed, I think, 21 bills, so it's hard for me to keep them all straight. But by and large, it's great to, again, be here. I've got back on the Courts of Justice Committee. I have been on 3 committees, and I've lost my seat on Courts of Justice, and I'm glad to be back on Courts of Justice. On the Senate, I'm the only lawyer practicing in Northern Virginia that sits on Courts of Justice Committee. And so for those of you, and I see Richard here, that litigate in Northern Virginia, I'm your voice, and I want to do a good job for you. So thanks again. I'm going to hand it back to Mark, and we'll take it away.
All right, so we're going to get to the questions. So start thinking about the questions that you have, and I think we'll just kind of alternate. Just one maybe on this side that way. That way we can make sure everybody gets the questions, and we'll stay here as long as you want us to stay, or as long as the town council folks will keep us in this chamber. Let me just tell you just a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing, in case that this might anticipate some questions. And let me pick up where Chap left on the courts of justice. In the House, we have about 13 or 14 standing committees, everything from agriculture to education to commerce and labor, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are 3 committees that are considered to be the top, top choices, if you will, the ones that you get on after you've served a long time, or you just happen to be very, very lucky, or what have you. But there are 3 that are considered to be the best appointments. Appropriations is the number 1. That's because that's where the spending side of the government comes in. So every project that involves state funding comes through appropriations. And that's a committee that's pretty much, the old joke. I used to work in Congress years ago, and it's the same thing in Congress as well. So we've had Jim Moran and Frank Wolf both retiring this year. They're both members of the Appropriations Committee, and they were both what they call cardinals, the chairmen at one point or another. And the old joke was there are 3 parties in politics: Democrats, Republicans, and appropriators. And I think it's the same thing in the General Assembly of Virginia as well. That's something that's really hard for us to get. In Northern Virginia right now, Bob Brink is the only voice in Northern Virginia, at least in Arlington, Fairfax area, that serves on that committee. And then the second one people consider to be like an equal second is Commerce and Labor, which deals with almost a third, maybe a third, maybe half of all industries in Virginia, from banks to utilities to you name it. Some of the biggest industries, every big company that you see is regulated through the Commerce and Labor. As a result, that's got a heavy jurisdiction. And then an equal to that is the courts of justice, which deals with all the civil litigation, all the judicial, criminal justice issues, all the judges that are appointed and such. And then below that, you got all these various different committees that people are on. I was very surprised this year to have been appointed to the courts of justice, and on the civil side of the committee as well, which is a blessing and a curse. A blessing in that it's a great committee assignment. It's a wonderful place to be able to work on so many issues that I personally care about. But it's a curse in that you're stuck in 3 days of committee meetings, Monday, Wednesdays, and Fridays, for 3 to 4 to 5 hours every single day. And so last night I was in courts until about 5 o'clock at night on a Friday afternoon, so I didn't get back up here till after dinner time. But I'm enjoying it, and it's a real honor to be able to work on that committee. And so this is, in addition to the other 3 committees I serve on. I'm on Finance Committee. I'm now the second highest ranking Democrat on the Finance Committee. I'm also on the Education Committee, where we've seen a lot of the education reform issues, and I know school calendar issue is going to be one of the hot topics that we're going to talk about this year, but that goes through the education. And I'm also on the Agriculture, Chesapeake, and Natural Resources, which deals with all of our number 1 industry in Virginia, which is agriculture, but also Chesapeake and environmental issues. And I have learned more about oyster harvesting and the peanut butter and you name it, some of these most obscure issues that I never thought were interesting, like bear hunting and Sunday hunting repeals as well. So I'm enjoying those committees. And I've put in about 11 bills this year. About 4 of them, 2 of them have passed so far. Another 2 are in the process of passing, dealing with open government, FOIA issues, dealing with absentee balloting for elections, and also a new technology-based fraud and tax evasion fraud that we're trying to nip in the bud. So I'm working on a number of those issues. And then there are some other bills that we ended up not being able to pass as legislation, but we were able to convene an agency working group to look into it, including the dementia. We want to make sure that we, working with AARP, Alzheimer's Association, we want to make sure that Virginia is ready for what's been now called the silver tsunami of our folks, our friends who are baby boomers who are starting to retire now. And in the next generation, we will have a lot more elderly population that are living longer, living healthier, but in terms of our mental capacity is not as strong as they ought to be. So we want to make sure that our Commonwealth is ready for that group of our elder senior citizens. And so I'm working on a number of issues, but enough about us. Let's hear from you. And I just want to recognize our supervisor from Hunter Mill, Kathy Hodgins. Thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to your service with all of us here. And why don't we go ahead and open it up, and then we'll just kind of rotate. Sometimes I'll answer, sometimes Chap will answer, sometimes both. Sometimes we'll just both say nothing. How's that? Oh, and Alex here has a microphone, so make sure you speak into this because we have cameras all around us.
Hi, I'm Lisa Arltascoto. I've met both of you, and I'm very happy that you came out to my house and met my daughter Elena, who has severe special needs, and you've been just so open about my concerns about disability issues. Thank you very much, Senator Peterson, for sponsoring the bill. to raise the respite care hours back up to 720. It's very much appreciated. I had a question for you about the ID and the DD waivers. As you know, there's a very long waiting list. Elena's been on the list for 2 years now. We're anticipating about 10 more years before she will actually be able to use these waiver services. Can you expand on that a little bit, or do you know what's happening with that?
Yeah, let me talk a little bit about that, and thank you, Lisa, for being here. And I visited Lisa over the summer and her wonderful daughter, and it was a great example. If you meet a constituent and you see a line in a budget and it doesn't really mean much to you, but then when you meet a family that's impacted, it means a lot. The respite care amendment deals with respite care, which essentially is care to give parents a break. So it's care outside of the ordinary hours where they can have time to simply have a break from caring for their own child 24/7. And I put in a budget amendment to kick that from 480 to 720 hours a year. And again, that's something we reduced during the recession and trying to take it back up. And I know it means a lot to parents like Lisa. The issue had to do with waivers for ID and DD, and that's intellectual disability and developmentally disabled. And those are two different categories of disabled, typically children. And what a waiver is, I don't want to assume anything. Historically, what Virginia did was when we had a disabled child, we would place them in an institution. So if they weren't able to function on their own, we would place them in an institution such as Northern Virginia Training Center, and they would stay there for the rest of their lives. And that was the model up through really the 1960s. And then we started going more towards what's called a community care model, where we could place them in a residential home, or if the family still wanted to care for the child within their own household, and most families do, they could qualify for what's called a Medicaid waiver. And Medicaid waiver simply means that rather than place them in the institution, the family will keep that child at home, and they will then get support, which typically is a stipend from the state to support that child. And the Medicaid waiver program has been great. It's almost been a victim of its own success, and that it's so popular that we've sort of added to it incrementally, but we have a waiting list of children to get on it. And in a lot of cases, it's a matter of capacity, having enough caregivers to deal with that capacity. Now, this year, I'm sure, you're not on appropriations, are you? No, all right. You'll get there. All right. We're constantly trying to add Medicaid waivers, and in some cases, we've also changed definitions, which has obviously taken more children into the ambit of the statute. I feel like we've been adding a couple hundred a year, so hopefully we've been buying down that waiting list pretty rapidly. Your daughter's, what, 8? Okay. So, my hope would be that we would be able to get to children, say, within 3 or 4 years, so that waiting list, while you project it forward, we'll be able to sort of buy that down more and more rapidly. But the biggest issue, Lisa, is just capacity. And one thing I must add is the caregivers that we pay right now, in a lot of cases, we're paying them $9-10 an hour, and we're having a problem right now with whether or not that's even a wage that is sustainable. And we've already got regulations. You're not even allowed to add to the wage, and so that's another issue. But I would say my main answer to you is just capacity and expanding capacity. Yeah.
The only thing I would add, and thank you, Lisa, and say hi to Elena for us. The only thing I would add is that you're right. There's so many different aspects of this, but every single answer comes down to funding. There's no philosophical or political or other types of regulatory burdens. It's just, do we have enough funding? And if we had enough funding, we can solve that problem. Unfortunately, right now, Virginia being a fiscally conservative state, which I'm fine with that. I think that's the right way to do it. But because we're so fiscally conservative, we don't raise new revenues. Last year when we passed the transportation bill, that was the first time in a generation that we increased the revenues that came into the state for a very specific earmarked purpose, which is transportation. But since we don't have new revenues coming in, it's always a question of which priority gets funded first. And with DDs and ID waivers, it always ends up becoming something that on both sides of the aisle, everybody's passionate about it, everybody wants to support it, but it tends to be that at the very, very end of the budget process, if there's some extra cash left over, they'll say, okay, let's put this towards that, as opposed to that being one of the first things that we fund. So that's frustrating, but that just happens to be the reality. And also thank you for your service on the Rotary Club as well. That's a fellow Rotarian here. All right, let's go this way. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I just wanted to.
Yeah, we're on camera, so we're on camera now.
Yeah, hi, my name's Ray Pickles. I live here in Vienna. And this morning you were talking about the license plate reader thing. And I like that idea so much I came back to say thank you, except it needs to be stricter.
Okay.
You said they can keep the data for a while. If it were my choice, I would say they get a list in their little police car computer of all the license plates they're looking for.
Right.
And they're driving around, and the computer sees a license plate that it's looking for, and a red light goes off on the dashboard so the police knows he just passed a license plate that he's looking for, so he can turn around and go after that guy. Other than that, he has no business keeping any data, any length of time at all. You know, this thing with the NSA, James Clapper, the NSA guy, was lying and lying and lying, and every time he told a lie, Snowden would come out with evidence that he was lying, and he'd lie, and he'd lie. And finally, there's no. Finally, Obama just says, "We don't care what the commission say. We're just going to keep doing this." So I don't want the government keeping any data ever whatsoever that it has no use keeping.
All right. And Ray, thank you. And by the way, you need to join the ACLU immediately because that is their position. I'm being serious. It's funny, I've been talking to the ACLU. I've been talking to former Attorney General Ken Cuccinelli, who's also on the same page. I've also been talking to police chiefs who say, listen, it's just not feasible to sort of dump it immediately because oftentimes we collect the data, we then cross-reference it to see if we have any, for example, pending arrest warrants, and then we dump it. My goal is to try and limit that period to as much as possible. Just in the reality of it, it probably would be like 7 days or so, just because again, there's some practical feasibilities. I tend to lean towards the civil libertarian side, like you do. By the same token, there are some just sort of practicalities where you collect data before you dump it, you know, as to whether or not there's a pending arrest warrant or something like that. But the bottom line is, I agree. Where there's no warrant and there's no criminal investigation, there's no need for the government to be collecting data on, you know, where we're driving our cars.
Just on that point, that bill hasn't come up on the House side yet, but let's remember something that some of you folks might remember from history. Back in the 1950s and 60s, the FBI and police were doing exactly that. When Martin Luther King was giving a speech at a church parking lot, there were cops and FBI agents walking around and collecting license plate numbers. It's just that they didn't have a digital scanner. They actually had to physically write down the numbers on a little notepad. So the police, law enforcement, has been and continues to collect information at massive levels for innocent activities. That's been ongoing since probably the first days of our nation. The difference this time is technology makes it so much easier and so much more capable of massively handling a lot and also sorting it and then trying to figure out a pattern that comes with it. The good side, if I want to, to the extent that we can defend what the government's doing, the good side is that's one of the tools that they use to try to ferret out terrorism and problems and such, which I'm not an expert on NSA stuff, but that's the positive. The negative side is, what are they doing with all this data? And I'm a civil libertarian as well, and I try to always draw the line on what's the government's role versus the private sector's role. And I happen to work in an industry that is very involved in cloud and data management and such. And what I've always found, having talked to a lot of experts in this area, is the private sector actually has far, far, far more amounts of data that you and I have. You go to the pharmacy, you buy whatever drug for your kid's cold. Guess what? That is in the cloud somewhere to be matched up with the next time you come home and you happen to get a coupon in the mail from a company that sells that particular product. Maybe it was 3 weeks later, so you don't make that connection, but they're all connected. And so to the extent that the private sector is also doing this, we have to figure out what's the government's role and what's the private sector's role. And if we're going to rein in the government side of it for legitimate law enforcement, we also have to have a conversation about what is the private sector doing with this data as well. So it's a very complicated issue, but let's just acknowledge that this isn't a new phenomenon. The government's been doing this forever and ever. It's just gotten worse, or if you want to call it worse, because of the technology enabling that. So I just wanted to throw that out there. Let's kind of bounce between the two sides of the aisle here. Not political aisles, just wherever you just end up randomly sitting. So let me start with you. Yes. Okay, George always goes first.
Speak to the mic. Okay, George Creed, live here in Vienna. Chap, this is since you sponsored the bill, I want to throw this your way. Sure. The ethics laws that you're putting in. Of course, it's going to affect you folks that are elected down there and serve in Richmond. It's going to affect, I would assume, the folks that are supervisors here at the local level in Fairfax, on down to the town mayor and council, on down to some of us who are in appointed positions like me on the BZA. When you get down to our kind of level, what are you looking at this point that's going to increase what we now report?
I don't think it'll have any effect on you, George. And let me walk through kind of what my reform package is. And by the way, I'm glad you were there Thursday, because you could see I actually lost the debate on the floor when it came to attorney general conflicts and hiring outside counsel. But one of my biggest bills is actually putting the General Assembly on the same footing as local officials. Now, I know I see Kathy nodding her head, and let me tell you something. Kathy and Carrie and Howard and Edith, they're all subject to something called the Virginia Freedom of Information Act, and even you are also on BZA. Guess who's excluded? Us two. Yeah, really. And the reason is because, quote, we deal with, I don't know what, more sensitive matters. I mean, you know, we deal with some sensitive stuff, we deal with some silly stuff. The bottom line is we right now are exempt under state law from compliance with the Freedom of Information Act. So my Senate Bill 212, my number one piece of legislation is to take away the General Assembly's exemption under FOIA. And it is, I have yet to have anyone give me a logical defense for us being exempted while all of our local officials, county boards, town officials, BZA, volunteer boards are subject to FOIA. And yet we are exempt. And you know what? I'm going to have my hearing on Monday. I'll probably go down in flames, okay? And the bottom line is because legislators, people in my position, don't want that type of scrutiny. And don't ask me why. I mean, to me, when you're subject to FOIA, it makes you a better public representative. You got to be more accountable. You got to be not just more careful, but more accountable for what you do. So that's my number one reform. Number two was a cap on gifts. You know, listen, we serve in a General Assembly, but we both have outside employment. And people are receiving gifts, you know, trips to the Masters and, you know, catering to the daughter's wedding and all these things. It's not right. I don't care if it's legal or illegal. It's wrong, okay? That type of stuff, it influences legislation. Don't for a moment think that people are giving those gifts away out of the goodness of their heart. Is anyone in this room that stupid? No, you're not. This is one of the best educated Senate districts in the history of Senate districts, okay? Nobody's that stupid. I will also say that you have caps on contributions. You know, we have unlimited contributions in this state. I had a bill to put a cap on contributions just because when one person donates $500,000 or $1 million, it gives them too much influence on that elected official. Too much. Again, that bill's already been defeated, so I'm not going to cry about it. But my reforms were, my goal is to kind of change the culture, which, again, you know, maybe I'm a voice in the wilderness. I'm like John the Baptist down there, but I just can't, I can't accept that right now having unlimited gifts and unlimited contributions, you know, we can pass our sort of piecemeal reforms, but that's going to be a problem. So that's, I don't think anyone's giving, or is anyone taking you to the Masters, George?
No, and I don't expect it.
Okay, so you're going to be fine. You're going to be fine. But that's where I'm coming from. Mark, did you want to add to that?
Sure. The only thing I would add, and Frank, there are two bills, packages of bills that are moving through, so we haven't had a chance to work on it yet. It's going through my committee courts. There was a special committee on ethics that was formed. They've met twice now, and that bill is now going to come before us sometime this coming week, so I'm looking forward to getting involved with that. But what I've said from the beginning, and I'll continue to say, is there's a difference between corruption and ethics, all right? There's a slight difference, not a big one. And what we're trying to do is, in the legislative world, what we can try is to clarify the ethics rules so that we can make sure everybody knows what the barriers are. But if you are corrupt, it doesn't matter what the law says. And so what we are trying to do is to have ethics reform so that we all know what the rules are and so we can all live by certain rules so that these types of conflicts and all these crazy stories that you're hearing about never happens. But I don't think, and nobody can legislate corruption. It's just something that, I mean, even the Ten Commandments tried that. Okay, it's not working right now because there are still people that are fully violating our Ten Commandments. And so I just want to make sure that we understand that just because the General Assembly passes something doesn't mean that we've clearly gotten rid of corruption. If there are bad actors, there are bad actors. And what you and I, all of us as citizens, ought to do is make sure that we talk about these issues, hold all of us accountable so that whether you're complying with ethics rules or not, The real question is, are you a person of integrity as opposed to corruption? And that's something that just, I don't know how you legislate that. Anyway.
Gentleman has a question right there. Alex.
We might also maybe do like, kind of like, okay, next person, next person back there, that way, and John here. That way we kind of know who's coming up, okay?
Yes, sir.
David Swink, I'm a member of the Fairfax County Taxpayer Alliance Board. On the subject of ethics, there's something called HB 706, introduced by Gilbert and now Marshall, I believe, that deals somewhat along the same lines of ethics, but in the deals with the executive's failure to obey Virginia laws. This is obviously an ethical thing, but not something that deals with funding or anything like that. It's just a state of mind that says, yeah, Virginia law, I don't agree with it. This is an Eric Holder type of thing, where I choose or choose not to obey a certain law. Is this going to be maybe wound up in the ethics reform as well?
I can answer that. We just passed it yesterday, first of all, in the House. The House passed it. I'm going to try to look up the bill, the vote as we speak, because I was part of the conversation both in the House Courts Committee as well as on the floor yesterday. And I'm going to read the amended version because there's a floor substitute that came up. Todd Gilbert put this bill in. And the bill deals with an issue that I think all of us can agree as far as the underlying purpose. What we disagree with, and I voted against it, by the way, both on the House floor as well as on the in the committee. What we disagree with is the legal/constitutional question of that. And I'm going to read this to you. The bill is very simple. It says, yeah, it's called technology.
He's talking while he's with his left hand doing all this.
That machine thing, yeah. In a proceeding in which a provision of the Constitution of Virginia are contested or are at issue, or in which a constitutionality, legality, or application of a law established under legislative authority is at issue, and the governor and attorney general choose not to defend the law in such proceeding, the General Assembly, the House of Delegates, the Senate, or a current member of the General Assembly at the commencement of the proceedings shall have standing and shall have the right to intervene as a party. Now, I know that sounds very googish and legalese. For those of you who don't practice constitutional law every day, it sounds pretty confusing. Simply what it comes down to is this. If there is a statute or a constitutional language right now that is the law of Virginia, and somebody challenges that to say, hey, we don't think that law is good or is invalid, what have you, generally speaking, the governor, as the chief executive, has to defend that law because that's part of his state's laws. And the attorney general, as a lawyer for that governor, is a person that goes into court and says, okay, I'm going to litigate this case on behalf of the state that's been sued or the state's interest. Well, we've had some examples in the last few years. I mean, actually, this example has come up many, many times, but just the last couple of years, the example has come up where an attorney general says, you know what, this law is actually unconstitutional on its face. It actually violates what we think is a constitution, so there's no point in me arguing to defend this. It's not going to work. And therefore, the attorney general has refused to litigate or to defend that case. That's happened in the past. Recently, there's another example that just happened where the Attorney General said, you know what, we have a constitutional amendment that is in contrast and based on case law that's recently been litigated at the Supreme Court is almost directly in contravention of the 14th Amendment Equal Rights Protection, and therefore our Virginia Constitution, even though it was ratified and approved by voters a few years ago, that language as it stands is not constitutional under U.S. Constitution. Therefore, there's no point in me defending it because it may fall. And so what the Attorney General has done is say, I'm not going to defend that case, but instead I'm going to have the court clerk representing Virginia as a state defend that case. And so the situation that we are facing today is we've had a number of these examples, and it's no point in putting party labels to who's doing what. There have been examples like that. So the bill that I just read to you, the question is, in that circumstance, does it make sense for Chap Peterson or Mark Keam, or you name any General Assembly member, to get up and say, I will defend that law on behalf of Virginia, and let that person walk into the court and say, all right, I'm here representing Virginia, and I'm going to defend that law? Well, we don't think that's right for two reasons. One is, under the constitutional, the concept of standing. Standing is something that the courts have to give you. You don't say, I have standing. Just because the law says you have standing doesn't mean that you can walk in. The court says, sorry, sir, I'm not going to recognize you. You don't have legal justification to be in court. So there's no way that we can legislate standing. So that's one. That's the reason why I voted against it. Second reason is in vast majority of the times when these examples happen, that is the outcome of the political process, meaning that when an attorney general who is elected by the people and the General Assembly who is also elected by the people, we all work together in Richmond. The legislative branch's job is to come up with the laws, come up with good ideas, bad ideas, whatever it is. We come up with it, we get enough people to sign it, then it becomes a law. Doesn't mean that that law is constitutional just because we passed it. At that point, the courts step in and say, all right, we're going to look at the constitutionality. And it's the executive branch's job to get in there and fight with the judicial to see whether that should be or not. So that's an inherently political decision that's been made by the legislative branch, the executive branch, and the judicial branch. And for us all of a sudden to say, well, we just passed a law, now we're going to go to the court and defend it, and now we're going to tell the executive that you don't have a right to defend it, we're going to defend it for them. It muddies up that separation of powers that's been in place for over 200 years. So I didn't think that the facts, no matter how egregious the facts may be, merit us changing the legal standing and the separation of powers we've had. So we can argue all day long about whether Mark Herring or Ken Cuccinelli or Jerry Beliles or anybody else has done the right thing or wrong thing. But as far as the House Bill 706, I just didn't think that it passed the constitutional test, which is why I voted against it, sir.
What was the vote count on that?
Oh, I'll tell you. Should I say anything about it? Or? It was, actually, no, we're going to vote on it Monday because yesterday was a debate, and so it was engrossed, which means it goes to the last vote. The Monday will be the vote. So I will vote against it on Monday, yeah.
You comment on how interactive you mentioned you get together with the executive and the courts. Does that happen in a lifetime, or within a month, within a week, or what? How interactive is that relationship?
Sir, I'm not quite sure what the question is, but we work with them all the time.
If Maricopa was doing it, it wouldn't be here for 5 years. So, I mean, it wouldn't recycle for 5 years.
Yeah.
It wouldn't clarify with the other jurisdictions.
Yeah, I understand that. There's also a big difference between federal and state law. And the reason is this. It's on the standing issue, if we were to go in, and Chap will know this better, but if we were to walk into a state court and said, hey, by the way, I want to have jurisdiction, I want to have standing, I'm a father of some issue, or I'm the business holder, whatever, that's a different question than us going into the federal courts and saying, I'm representing the state of Virginia. If I were to walk into the federal court and said that, they'd say, well, do you have federal question? Do you have federal jurisdiction? There are all kinds of federal reasons, statutory and diversity of jurisdiction and such, that gives me standing. We just can't say we have standing just because the General Assembly gave me standing. And not to mention the fact that we have 140 members. What if Chap and I disagree? He walks in and says he represents Virginia, and I walk in and say I represent Virginia. Who wants to litigate that discussion? So that's why I thought that was a bad, poorly written out policy.
Yeah, I'll just be very simple. I think Mark's right that you can't pass a law to give yourself standing. I mean, that's a judicial determination. Having said that, I think and it seems like the Attorney General's not going to defend a law or principle of the Constitution, somebody ought to be appointed to do it. Usually if you step aside, if you have a conflict of interest, you would appoint. Let's say I have a client who sues another one of my clients, and I'm like, well, I can't take the case. I give a referral to another attorney that can, So I think I'm not quite sure what the practicalities are. I haven't talked to the AG about that case, or frankly, I haven't talked to him since he got sworn in. But we've both been busy. But I assume someone's representing that constitutional provision. So, all right. Next question. Yes, ma'am.
My name is Linda Rodefer, and I live in Penderbrook, and my issue is the mentally ill. I have a daughter who's 37 years old, and she's mentally ill, and she's been receiving services from Fairfax County, but over the years they have declined dramatically due to budget cuts. And I know the situation with Creed Deeds has brought a lot of attention, but the mentally ill citizens who aren't violent, or I know it's hard to tell, but I know my daughter isn't violent, they fall through the crack. I don't want them to fall through the cracks with all the attention that has been given to the violently mentally ill. And I hope that if money is available from the state, that it will trickle down. What particularly is needed in my daughter's case is more community services. She used to be able to see a therapist once a week. Now it's once every 3 weeks, and that's probably for a half an hour. She receives spotty community services from Community Resident Services, which is paid by Medicaid, but there were a lot of Medicaid cuts, so she lost that worker. There really is no caseworker to help navigate her with the Medicaid, the services. She will let things lapse and then it falls into my lap. It just happened. I got help from Linda Smith's office, and that is a county issue because it's the Medicaid is administered by the counties. But one of my other concerns is what's going to happen to her when I'm no longer able to do it. I'm the only one she has. Somebody in the field said that is why a lot of the citizens end up homeless or commit suicide. They have no one to navigate the system for them. And believe me, it isn't easy. It isn't even easy for me. And I'm a retired county employee, and I think that helps. So that is my issue, that not just the violently mentally ill need help, but just the mentally ill. More services are needed. It's one of the first areas that seems to be cut, and I think because there's not enough advocacy, they say there's not even as much advocacy for the mentally ill as there is for alcohol, drug addiction, or the mentally disabled people.
Right.
So that's,
Can I ask you a couple questions?
Sure.
Do you get your funding through the CSB? Community
now,
Services
what
Board?
Fund, what
I mean,
she,
your daughter's treatment, is that received
yes,
through the
yes,
CSB?
yes,
Okay.
yes, the Springfield Mental Health Office, yes. But
Okay.
they do the best they can, I'm sure.
And they haven't assigned a caseworker, or?
She has what is called a therapist, but I've talked to this woman,
Right.
and she says, I'm not going to help her with her benefits. There's just really nobody to help. And people who don't have parents like me or
Yeah.
who are able to help, I don't know what happens to them. Like I said, they end up committing suicide, they end up homeless. But to answer your question, yes,
Okay.
but and this is a county issue that Linda Smith's office told me
Okay.
to bring up at the budget hearings.
Right.
There's just more services are needed.
All right. You know, I really don't have a great response for that other than just to listen to you. I sort of, on sort of the macro level, the Community Services Board is how we provide support for families in this situation. I've had some comments back from people that the CSB approach may not be the best one, that it may be easier to just use our state agencies to work directly with families. I do think that you need a caseworker assigned to coordinate the care. Otherwise, I think it's got to be trying. Does your daughter live with you?
No, she lives in Section 8 housing
Okay.
in Springfield, and we feel very fortunate that she has been able to live there for 10 years.
Right.
It's by Mike's American Grill. I think it's prime real estate.
Okay.
There was a proposal to raise it and redevelop it a few years ago. I'm
Right.
sure that's on the horizon, and frankly, I don't know where she will go. Group homes are few and far between in Fairfax County.
Yeah.
She's just lucky she got this Section 8. There's probably, it's not available. It's certainly not easy.
Okay.
Thank you, Linda, for that question. And also, I know this is an issue that many of us have family or friends that have loved ones in that category. And it's really unfortunate that it takes a headline-grabbing news story like Cree Deeds or Virginia Tech or something else like that that raises awareness. And it's also a shame that usually it's too late when we hear about those news stories, because a lot of our loved ones who end up getting into a violent situation, that violence could have been prevented had there been services ahead of time. And this is one of those areas where the government's investment of an ounce is definitely worth a pound of cure at the end. And so I'm sorry that you have to face that situation. What we're doing at the General Assembly right now is, especially in light of Cree Deeds, but also just because of the years and years of work that people have done, is to really understand where are the gaps right now in the Commonwealth. And so in the Senate side, with Senator Deeds taking the lead naturally, there's a package of bills that were kind of put together into an omnibus bill, and it's going to be coming out pretty soon, that deal with everything from the interagency coordination, the funding of it, making sure that what's called the CIT is a comprehensive intermediary teams, I think it's called, they're allocated in the right place. Yeah. I'm not an expert in this, as you can tell, but there are some the smartest people. Janet Howell is an expert in this, and she's on that board, and they're working together to put together a package from the Senate that's coming over. On the House side, we've had a special. It's interesting how we tend to form subcommittees, special subcommittees around issues. So this year we have a special subcommittee on ethics. We have a special subcommittee on mental health. And folks that are on that subcommittee are working on a package of bills as well. And at some point we're going to merge that with the Senate version and come up with it. But ultimately, and this goes back to Lisa's question earlier, ultimately the question is, do we have funding for this? And so the Appropriations Committee has also been looking at the mental health aspects of it. I put in a bill this year that would require a stronger coordination, interagency coordination, not just with law enforcement, but with the mental health offices, the CSBs, and the localities. And that bill is now going to be sent to a task force that the outgoing governor set up. Back in December, Governor McDonnell appointed a number of people to put together an immediate task force to look at what happened in Bath County and to see if there might be some gaps. And Governor McAuliffe took on that executive order and reauthorized it. Among the members there from the General Assembly, Janet Howell and Joe Yost, and I think there are a couple of other people that I've talked to as well. And so my bill has been rolled into their task of the work that they're doing. So I'm keeping an eye on that. But ultimately what we all have to be looking for is when the budget comes out, which will be another, 3 weeks, 2 weeks? And whenever the big budget package comes out, we need to look to see how much funding is there. And then I can guarantee you there'll be lots of amendments offered to increase the funding for various aspects, including CSB and mental health. So once the states the state level, we can then provide the overall cap on how much that we have. Then the counties and others can come in and say, okay, well, we got the matching funds, or we can use that money towards the specific needs. But at the end of the day, it's like any other priority. We have so many needs, and John can tell you here about all the issues that he's working on that could certainly use some extra funding as well. So for us, once again, it comes down to how do you prioritize the limited funds that we have. And that is the toughest part, probably the toughest part of CHAPS in my job, is to figure out, of the limited amount of funds, what should become the first priority for us to spend. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Tim Hannigan, and I live in Oakton. I think I've coached basketball and football on every field in Vienna, so I kind of grew up here with my 4 kids. I thank you for hosting this town hall meeting this afternoon and the way you're handling it. It is done very well. I have one question about Medicaid expansion. Before I get to that, I want to mention or kind of follow up to a comment Delegate Keam made, where he said, private companies collect data and the federal government does, or government does. There's a key distinction you didn't mention, and for whatever reason you probably had it in your head and you didn't mention, or maybe you left it out intentionally. When the government has private data, they have coercive power over people whose data they have. Private companies can't do that. And in fact, if private companies engage that type of thing, they're acting criminally. Now, you can say the government is acting criminally also, which it is, if they're using it improperly, and particularly their coercive power. But it hasn't really worked out too well over the years. Go back to Nixon, go back to Johnson, Roosevelt, everybody with that has always tried to stress things. So that's just a point I wanted to make as a follow-up to what you said. So the Medicaid expansion, as you know, the Medicaid Innovation Reform Commission has been meeting since last June to evaluate, at the behest of Governor McDonnell, what are the best options? How can you reform the current Medicaid program? And so what should be done? And they've met, I think, 4 or 5 times, been down to every one of those meetings. Considering the Obamacare version of Medicaid, there's been some limited effort to try to look at other methods of expanding Medicaid. And then, of course, the big news came in January, within 2 weeks of when Governor McAuliffe was inaugurated, and he came forward and said, give me the authority give me the authority to implement it, along the lines of some type of executive power grab. So my 2 questions are, first, what is your position on Medicaid expansion? And then secondly, what is your position on the move by Governor McAuliffe to try to wrest that power away from the General Assembly and impose Medicaid expansion as an executive order?
Okay, let me start with that. Sure. Yeah. Thanks for that question, Tim. And I absolutely agree with you about the role, the difference between the government and the private sector as far as data collection. And as I said, maybe it's inarticulately, it happens in both contexts. I'm far less concerned about the private sector because there's a commercial profit reasons why they do it. It's not a agenda or a ideological reason why. The government, the legitimate thing is law enforcement. The illegitimate thing is they got power, they're going to exercise it. So as a civil libertarian, I'm much more concerned about that side. But that's just a reality, so I guess that's my point. Second, on the Medicaid expansion, my position, as I said in the very beginning of this, is I'm for it. Last year, I voted for the MERC to be created through the budget process so that we can have a mechanism by which the legislative body can allocate some funding for the expansion as well as provide a path towards expansion if expansion is warranted. The way the MERC process has happened is the members of MERC is the Medicaid Innovation Reform Commission, MIRC. The way the MERC Commission has happened so far is they have done everything that is within MERC's power to either approve or not approve. In other words, there was a series of conditions that the federal government said, these are things that each state ought to do in order for you to expand Medicaid and receive the matching grants from the state, from the federal side. At the state level, the MERC Commission members have done those steps, except for a few other steps that are still pending, which they cannot do until they've accepted it. So it's a little bit of a chicken and egg situation where catch-22, where you can't fully expand Medicaid at the MERC level until you've accepted it first, and then the next steps come into reform. So that's the process on MERC. And the executive part, and I'm not exactly sure what Governor Terry McAuliffe said. I mean, I read the news articles. I have not talked to him about it personally yet, and I haven't talked to his staff about it. But what the governor is saying is, if the legislature this year, during this legislative session, which we have, 3-4 weeks left, if the legislative session does not change the MERC process or doesn't add anything more in the budget to authorize or create something else, then after that deadline's over, which is March 9th or so, we'll have several more months before the end of this year. And what the governor is looking to do is either send down something either before that time, in other words, once the legislature says, our hands are tied, we can't do any more, at that point the governor may come in and ask for legislative solutions, or during the veto session, he may add something on the budget that might be sent to him that would allow for some tinkering. So I don't think, the way I understood it, it wasn't that McAuliffe is saying, the General Assembly has nothing to do with this, I'm going to do it myself. It's not that kind of a power grab, if you want to call it. I think it was him saying, if this legislature can't come up with solutions, let me see if there's a way I can do it from the executive branch using the budget process. And my understanding also, I'm not on the right committee right now, but my understanding is that the Senate side, Chap's colleagues on the budget committee, the finance committee, they're actually looking to see if there's a way that we can push this on the legislative front. So we're not done yet. We've got plenty of time for us to work on this. So I would caution all of us, regardless of whether you're for or against it, I would caution all of us to not jump to conclusions and assume anything, because this is one where I've talked to my very conservative Republican colleagues, and they're for it. It's just that they don't see how they can get to that, with the fiscal concerns that's been raised, legitimate fiscal concerns. And then I've talked to some of my liberal friends who are just for it, except they're also concerned about some of the financial concerns as well. So if we can solve the financial aspect of it, I'd say a vast majority of General Assembly, House and Senate, Republicans and Democrats, are for the idea of adding more coverage for uninsured people. It's just that the money piece is what's holding us back. So be patient and follow through and see what's happening, and I'll do the same. As soon as I learn more, and by the way, this is a good segue. If any of you not received my updates on email, Chap and I both have robust email constituency letters that we send out. Please sign up for that. So markkeam.com, fairfaxsenator.com. Fairfax, yeah. Oh, okay. VienaSenator.com, since he's here. And so sign up to get our email updates. And as soon as we have more details on Medicaid expansion, we will send it out to you so you all know what's going on. Wait, before we get back to the second round of questions.
I want to do a quick appendage to that. I have both a political, a theological, and a practical response to your question. Political, I support Medicaid expansion. I think it's our tax money. We already paid for it. We need to keep that money in Virginia. I mean, it's already been paid to the federal government. I do agree that Medicaid, like any government agency, like DOD, for example, can be reformed. It can be delivered more efficiently. But it's kind of like if someone called my law office and said, hey, I want to retain you as my attorney. I'll pay you $10,000 a month. I don't turn around and say, well, let me audit my office first. I say, yeah, I'll definitely take the business and we'll figure it out. So that's number one. Number two, theologically, philosophically, government can't spend the money. Only we appropriate the money, okay? And I'm in the General Assembly. I'm very jealous of our constitutional prerogatives, one of which is we spend the money. The governor gets to appoint people. He gets to sit in a big house and, you know, get a paycheck much larger than mine, but only we spend the money. The practical is that this governor has made Medicaid expansions kind of the hallmark, at least of his first year, and that's fine. And I think, you know, I'm a Democrat. I think it's a good plan. However, he needs to make an accommodation with basically the Republicans in the House of Delegates, and because that is the countervailing political weight in Richmond. And a lot of this business is just about making deals, and you got to sit down and break bread with the other side and say, this is what I want to accomplish. You tell me what you want to accomplish. And you know what? Once we figure that out, I will go deal with people like Chap Peterson. I'll tell them to shut their mouth or whatever, and we'll make that happen. And I think this governor, and I have confidence he can do that, is going to have to figure out a way to accomplish that goal, which is more than just steamrolling people, because you're not going to steamroll people in the House of Delegates, okay? So that was my practical point. Thanks for the question. Let's get
some folks
someone who has
yeah. And then we'll get back to the second round. And there's a gentleman on that answer.
Thanks for spending the time. Pasha Maggi, Town of Vienna. Question about the solar rooftop bill.
Yeah.
First of all, anytime you can lower energy bills, that's great. I think it's a good idea. What does it mean for Vienna? We've got a Board of Zoning Appeals. We think it works great. Proud of their work there. How does it practically work outside of the homeowners association?
Okay, it only is a restriction on HOAs. So in terms of BZA appeals, it will have no effect. It simply is where you have an HOA that would have bylaws prohibiting solar panels or solar installations. Those bylaws would not be enforceable. Now, you can still have reasonable, you know, aesthetic things and things of that nature, but you just can't have a prohibition. And one of the things I mentioned is HOAs are important because of all the new construction in Virginia right now, about 80 to 90% is taking place within an HOA. And so when HOAs have restrictions, that has a huge chilling effect on industries like solar. So in terms of BZA's jurisdiction, it's not changed.
Good afternoon. My name is Garth Robbins. I'm a resident of Vienna. I have a statement and two questions. One question I will come back in a year from now to look for an answer for. Two, and one I'd like you to answer today. The first statement is, I came today, I've never been to one of these sorts of functions before, to hear about things that I didn't know about, or hear things about my representatives and senators that I didn't know about. It was very interesting to me to hear you both as self-declared civil libertarians multiple times, so that was very encouraging to me. That was my statement. My question is, given that, I think we can all hopefully agree that the United States was founded based upon the concept of liberty. Given that, what do you feel, both of you, are the legitimate functions of government in a free society? So that's my question. I'll come back for an answer in a year. Okay. Hopefully Milton Friedman. Okay. What are the legitimate functions of government in a free society? And my next question is, also given the statement that you made earlier about it doesn't matter what the rules are, if we have corrupt actors or bad actors, then they're not going to care what the rules are and they're going to break them, violate them at will anyway. We have a new governor who has stated as one of his priorities some more gun control laws. At least that's what I've heard and read. Can we count on you to fight against that?
Well, I mean,
Okay. Yeah, I mean, first of all, there's all sorts of measures, and firearms are regulated in Virginia. I served on militia and police for years when I was in the House. I'm very familiar with concealed carry, background checks. I mean, any type of law you can imagine. I will tell you on the Senate side, I don't know. Maybe we have a couple bills coming over. I'm not quite sure what. I haven't really seen all that much this year. We've typically had a raft of legislation dealing with firearms, and we don't have as much this year, to be quite candid. So, in terms of, the right to own, the right to carry, pretty much in Virginia, that's protected. I think transactions under federal law are subject to a background check if they're done basically through a licensed firearms dealer. You probably already know that. Typically, if it's not a dealer transaction or if it's done through a private sale, there is no background check. Obviously, that's come up in the ambit of gun show loophole. For me, I'm a gun owner. You know, typically, I don't have a problem doing background checks on commercial sales. Okay, and I don't think most gun owners do. I think when it becomes a situation where you have, you know, transactions like, you know, your father buys you a gun for Christmas or something like that, then that's a different situation. By and large, as you probably know, this is a state that is friendly to the Second Amendment, and our laws are such. That's not to say, however, we don't have all the same standard laws. And I know we just passed a bill unanimously through the Senate where if you're under a violation of protective order for domestic violence, you forfeit your right to carry. So that, you know, just we do have, there are exceptions to that general rule. So anyways, it's hard to say, you know, are you in favor of gun control, are you against gun control, because these issues tend to break down on a fairly specific basis.
Well, first of all, thank you and welcome. I really appreciate you coming, and please tell your neighbors and friends to give us a call anytime you have any questions. Your first question is really great. We've done these town halls for many years now. I don't think anybody's ever asked me about the fundamental role of freedom in this country, but and I'll give you more than a year in terms of answer, but I think about these issues a lot. I actually do. And as somebody who was elected to represent free citizens in a free democracy, as somebody who walked in and said, I want to be a representative, I had to question for myself, why do I want to do this? And it really comes down to exactly what your point is, which is we don't have anything in this country if we don't have freedom. Now, people can redefine or argue about what freedom means, what liberty means. Is the government being overly restrictive? You know, is what President Obama doing, taking us back? All these arguments, they're all great. I've actually even gone to the Tea Party, and I know a lot of my Democratic friends have attacked me for going and speaking at a Tea Party convention. I did. I was the only Democratic elected official who went to a Tea Party convention to speak there because I was looking for common ground. And in order for us to have freedom, you got to have conversations freely. And turns out we had a lot of things in common. FOIA, transparency, government accountability. I've carried a bill a number of times, different bills. This year, one of the bills that I'm working on right now is to provide more sunshine and accountability for government. Guess who has been pushing really hard to get this bill passed? The Family Foundation. And guess who's been trying to stop me from getting it done? The state troopers. So it tells you where I stand on these issues, okay? So I'm very much in favor of expanding the rights and freedoms of liberties, but with that comes responsibility. And I think that's the fine line that we as government lawmakers and policymakers have to figure out. Where is the responsibility on behalf of the common good, but at the same time allowing maximum freedom for the individual? And that's not an easy balance, and there's no litmus test, there's no Democrats should be here, Republicans should be here. It's every issue is different, and every circumstance is different. And I think the hardest part of our job, beyond trying to find money for our friends like Elena and your daughter, the hardest part of our job is to figure out where that balance is. On guns, I don't like to use the word gun control versus gun rights because it's automatically you're starting with a division. It's about what is the responsible role of a gun owner and what is the legitimate proper role of the government in the regulation of firearms under the Second Amendment as amended by the Heller decision of U.S. Supreme Court. So that's where we should start. And I have a very simple philosophical way that I break this down, which is we, the government, we meaning the governmental side, should do everything possible to make sure that those people that want to own and to use a firearm of any kind gets only the right kind of weapons and firearms that the Constitution allows in a way that is the strictest process to make sure that nobody that we don't allow gets those guns. So at the point of sale, for example, whether it's at a store or at a commercial or wholesale, we should do everything we can to check the backgrounds, criminal background, mental health backgrounds, et cetera, to make sure that the person says who they are and doesn't have any other marks, mental health, or what have you. And we should do that as much as possible. But once that person has received that purchase, then he or she should be able to use it in the most responsible way. And so I've supported concealed carry laws. In fact, there was one concealed carry law that came up this week, 2 weeks ago, that I voted against. And the reason is it would create a loophole. Todd Gilbert, he had a bill that said if you are a concealed carry license holder from another state, let's say Florida or wherever, and you want to come into Virginia, you can carry it concealed without having to get a Virginia concealed carry under reciprocity. I'm fine with reciprocity if that state's laws and Virginia's laws are equal, just as tight, just as scrutinous If so, then reciprocity would make sense. But if there are some states that are lax, why should we let a lax state law allow them to bring a gun into Virginia when we might have a tougher law? And on top of that, the big loophole was the language said as long as they carry a valid ID, government ID to show. Well, if I'm a Virginian and I go to apply for a concealed carry, and let's say that the police says, nah, we can't give it to you. Sorry, you don't pass the test. I drive down to North Carolina or to South Carolina. I go there, establish a private residency. Oh, I'm sorry, not residency, but I go down there. I get my concealed carry license there. I drive right back into Virginia, and now I have a South Carolina concealed license. And under this law, I'd say, hey, I got my Virginia driver's license. I'm fine. So now we've created this opportunity for people who've lost their opportunity to carry concealed in Virginia to just go to another state, get one, and come right back and use a Virginia license. So what I wanted to do is say that state's driver's license ought to be the ID for that, but they didn't accept my amendment. So.
You're only talking about people who follow the law, though. What about the people who just stick the gun in their waistband and go about their business, who are bad actors, if you who don't care what the law is?
And exactly, and that's the question for all of us, not just the government. That's the question for all of us. How do we legislate morality? How do we legislate corruption? I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if Chad can do it. That's for every one of us and our maker to regulate us on. Anyway, let's
Get a couple more questions.
George, gentleman back there, gentleman here, and then we'll go to the second rounds.
Yes, sir.
It's good to be close to the mic.
All right.
Robert Navin, I live in Oakton. There's discussions about textbooks and maps.
Yes.
Chap, you know the issue. Please speak to it just for a bit.
Sure.
I appreciate the issue because I think it's an opportunity for Virginia and the United States to show up on a world stage, and we need to be world players. It's a very competitive world out there. How we handle these issues, I think, is very important.
Well, first of all, you're probably talking about the East Sea and Sea of Japan, or what is it, Ilbonhe, Donghae. And let me preface by saying I'm a redneck, okay? I grew up in Fairfax City. My mother's family has been in Virginia since the day before forever. I'm actually a direct descendant of a Pickett's Charge survivor, so I have my own historical issues to deal with, okay? But it's funny, by being married to a beautiful woman who happens to be Korean American, I sort of fell into this culture, and then Mark and I have this bond together through that. And then to make levels one more complicated, I used to live in Japan. I played for a rugby team there. I have very close friends there. And in fact, we used to have our summer training camp on what we call the Nihonkai, which is the Sea of Japan. So I see this whole issue through so many different prisms. Having said that, when this issue appeared, and I knew it was going to become an issue, I actually called my father-in-law. And he had grown up, excuse me, I hate these darn things. My father-in-law had grown up in Korea, what's today North Korea, under Japanese occupation. And he actually went to elementary school when all the public schooling was run by Japan, when they had tried to take the Korean identity and subordinate it and frankly turn it into Japanese. You were forced to speak Japanese, you were given a Japanese name, and all the place names were renamed in Japanese names. And that is the context in which he asked me to view this issue. And again, it's presumptuous of me to speak because Mark is Korean, but I will tell you that conversation I had with my father-in-law had a very direct impact on my decision how to view that issue, and as a result, I supported the bill. I spoke in favor of the bill. And again, I have absolutely nothing to do against the Japanese people, who have very close friends. I take some issue with this idea that somehow they're going to stop selling Toyotas and Hondas and things like that in the Commonwealth of Virginia because of what it says in our textbook. I can tell you, having lived in Japan, that's not an issue. They spend less time thinking about these things. So the bottom line is I did support that bill. I did not expect it to get the attention that it got, but I'm glad it did, because you know what? We have a lot of Koreans in this area, and it was a chance for folks to frankly learn a little bit from our friends. And again, there's no disrespect intended to any other nation. But to me, it was a constituent issue, and more importantly, my wife felt strongly about it. So, that constituent. So, having said that, I'm going to turn it over to Mark.
I'm going to keep it really short, and it's very simple. It's House Bill 11, Senate Bill 3, I think, 2 or 3, yeah. And the Senate bill has already passed the Senate. It's coming to the House. The House bill came out of a subcommittee on education last week. It'll be on full committee on Monday morning. I'm on the House Education Committee, so on Monday morning I'll have a chance to vote, and I'll be voting for it. and then it'll go to the House floor Wednesday or Thursday, so we'll have a vote on the floor, and I'll plan on speaking about my views as to why I'm supporting it then. But I'll just make it really simple because there's been a whole lot more heat than light on this thing. There's been a lot more controversy than anybody ever expected. When the Washington Post is running front page stories, it kind of tells you how the story is kind of spun out of control, if you want to call it that. Not to mention the Richmond Times and all the Korean newspapers and the Japanese newspapers. But it's a very simple bill. So I just want to make sure that we understand what it is, and then that way, if you hear more about this later, you can say, now all that the rest of the stuff you don't need to worry about. It's what's called a Section 1 bill, and this is important. For those of you who don't practice in the General Assembly, you probably never heard of it. A Section 1 bill is a bill that is not something that changes a code anywhere in the code. In other words, we're not going in and saying, okay, schools or wherever, this is what you need to do. Section 1 is kind of like an intent of the General Assembly. Yeah, it's kind of like the General Assembly says, it is our policy, it is our views that, and then you fill in the blank. So we have a lot of Section 1 bills that do all kinds of things. So let me start with that. And the reason I say that is because a lot of people have said, General Assembly shouldn't be codifying our textbooks. We're not doing that. It's a Section 1 bill. Secondly, the language is very simple. It says the Board of Education, which is the body that buys textbooks and regulates the SOLs and what have you in the classrooms, it says the Board of Education, the next time you purchase textbooks, make sure you have textbooks that include both references as opposed to just one. Because of historic inaccuracies, we want to make sure both sides are taught. And there are plenty of textbooks that are out there that do that now. So it's the sense of the General Assembly asking the Board of Education to purchase accurate historic textbooks. That is all it is. So the fact that the Japanese government is lobbying against this and trying, I have a Toyota, my wife has a Honda. They're trying to stop us from using our cars. I think this issue is blown way overboard. So I'm really hoping that after the vote is done, people will settle down, be happy about what the result is, and then we can move forward.
But what is the issue?
The issue is what Chap just talked about. In the textbooks that are currently being used in Virginia, there's a location between the body of water between Korea and Japan. Right now it's referenced as the Sea of Japan, which is what a majority of international groups have used for the last few generations, because that's how, this, I'll be somewhat subjective here, because that's how the One Nation has whitewashed that issue. And so instead of being called East Sea, which is what was historically known as, now it's called Sea of Japan. So this is an effort to say there is a controversy, there are two schools of thoughts, and let's make sure that our textbooks accurately reflect both of them. That's what it does. Those who have not spoken, we've got like two gentlemen and then three gentlemen, and then maybe we can try to wrap this up soon. I'm happy to stay as long as I want here, but I just want to make sure that people don't feel like you're stuck here if you don't want to be.
Well, speaking of Fords and Toyotas and Hondas, I've got a traffic question for you. I have heard that some of the congestion on 66, some companies are now proposing some I-95 Express kind of potential toll lanes on 66. Just in the beginnings, and Ms. Hudgens, maybe you know a little bit about this, beginning discussions about what we're going to do on that kind of congestion. Right. My first question is I-95 a success, and will Virginia have to pay a make-good payment? My understanding was the companies had some kind of 495 and 95, both, because, 495, because 95 is not finished yet, right? But 495. My understanding was that if it didn't make a profit, the state of Virginia would somehow make that company whole. I don't know quite how that goes. Okay, so correct me on that. Tell me what that's going to be. And secondly, would you support a situation on 66 that looks just like 495 that, in my book, excludes lanes from people who don't want to pay?
Probably not, but do you want to go ahead and answer that?
Yeah, I'm not. I think you're referring to Transurban, which is the company that did the private-public partnership, and they have a 99-year lease on that thing, and so. Right? So I'm not sure when they will come back and say they're not making the money when they've got 99 years to make it up. So I'm not sure what the facts are on that, so I shouldn't say anything about that. As far as the 66, right now the issue of both inside the Beltway and outside the Beltway I-66 improvement is squarely on the table. It's been years. Chap and many people have been working on this for many years to try to get VDOT to do some studies and give us some options. So we're finally at that stage where these conversations are going on. But nobody's made any decisions. And there are so many different options, and this is more of a county thing too. I mean, so many people are weighing in with what they would like to see, whether it's, should we explore Vienna Metro beyond Vienna? Do we want to do light rail? Do we want to have carpool? Do we want to have HOV? all these discussions are on the table. I'm not exactly sure where things are, because there's different studies going on. But I've always said all the above. Let's just get all the ideas out there. Let's get as many people to start thinking about this. And then once we start looking at the finances and the logistics of what's available, then we ought to be zooming in. But now I'm just excited that we're actually having these conversations, because even 5 years ago when I first ran, people said, I-66, we're not going to touch that thing. I mean, it's just, we're just not going to have conversations about it. But finally, we're at the stage where we're having these conversations.
Yeah, it's been 16 years since I was first elected to city council. I got on the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, and I was actually on an I-66 work group, and we had a master plan that we approved. This is in 1998. I was like 12 years old. And to be honest, so many of those things that we recommended have sat on the shelf for generation. I mean, almost a half a generation at this point. And I think we're finally at the point where Dulles Rail is finally being put to bed, and the 66 corridor will be the #1 traffic corridor in Virginia that we're going to tackle in the next couple of years. We've had 19 proposals. The outgoing administration, McDonald administration, they did what we call the EIS study on the I-66 corridor, which is an environmental impact statement that looks at the whole corridor and looks at what it can accommodate, and then makes sort of broad recommendations. And then since that time, they've had 19 private vendors come forward with ideas for potential solutions. And I think they had a meeting, Kathy, was it January 30th? A couple days ago. It wasn't there. Kathy says the 30th. I wasn't there. I was stuck in Richmond. But I will tell you, and both Mark and I are going to be, we're going to be in the room when they start sort of dividing down what's possible, what's not possible. A couple things to keep an eye on. One is expansion of the right-of-way. Now, I represent both sides of the right-of-way, town of Vienna and Fairfax City, and the surrounding neighborhoods. And any expansion of that right-of-way is potentially going to take down dozens, if not hundreds, of single-family homes. So that's an issue right there. So we need to see what we can do within the existing right-of-way. Secondly, transit. Right now we go to the town of Vienna, the Vienna Metro, and that's the last station on the Orange Line. Fixed rail is the most expensive form of public transit. Now, it may be that we could do some type of system to go further out on fixed rail. I'm skeptical. The other option is to do some type of rapid bus or something along those lines. And we've looked at that, which is a much more cost-efficient option, and take that out to, say, Gainesville. Okay, that's going to be one of the options we look at. Tolling lanes is another option. I will tell you, I tend to be more skeptical about tolling lanes. I've looked at Transurban. I've seen the good, the bad, and I supported the Transurban project. I think 66 is a little bit different. I will tell you that we're already seeing that the governor making promises down in Hampton Roads that where they have tolls down there, the governor, saying, I'll put money so you don't have to pay tolls. I don't want to see just Northern Virginians pay tolls, okay? I'm a little bit skeptical of that. So I'm looking for a non-tolling solution. Tolling to me is the last sort of option. But I think you'll see something major happening on this in the next 12 months in terms of getting a proposal, then it's going to be years of construction. But if you have ideas, by the way, especially if you're a traffic engineer, let me know. Thanks. Why don't we take one more, and then John, if we can get John, and Mark and I will stay as long as people want. Oh, do you got one back there? And then we'll do John. Yes, ma'am.
Absolutely. Hi, my name is Dina Espenscheid. I am brand new to the area. I've lived here less than a month. And just found out about this, so I'm late. So if this issue's already come up, I do apologize. I actually just moved up from the Hampton Roads area, and I'm concerned about the farm bill, the Farm Freedom Act. I want to thank you very much for being a co-sponsor. It's, where I lived, where my parents still live, it's very much a farm rural area, and that issue. Just west of the Norfolk area.
Which county? Isle of Wight?
Yeah, Isle of Wight. Okay. So anyway, I just want to thank you very much for being a co-sponsor of that, and then. What were your thoughts? How's it going? Where are we at? That type of thing. I know it's coming up to the floor soon.
Well, first of all, welcome to Northern Virginia. It's great to have you. Isle of Wight's a great county.
Lovely to add my car to your traffic.
Yeah, well, welcome aboard. The Farm Freedom Bills, that's an important bill. We have a great agriculture sector in Virginia. I will tell you, we have communities that have historically been agricultural, and ironically, we've seen people that have moved out to sort of retire, and quite frankly, as the retirees have sort of overwhelmed the agricultural communities, you've seen a little bit more, I don't want to say anti-agriculture, but less friendly to farming. And one of the things we do in General Assembly is try and strike the right balance. And freedom to farm basically says that if you grow products on your farm, that you have the right to sell those products. You don't need to go and get some type of permit from the state. You have the right to operate a family farm just like your parents did, just like your grandparents did. I support that. My great-grandfather came from Saluda, Virginia. My family still has a farm down there. And while I am about the last thing from a farmer, I do believe that the agricultural legacy of the state is important. And so I have supported that bill. Mark, give it freedom.
Yeah, on the House side, that's Bobby Orrock's bill, I think, right? I'm not sure about the Senate side. So that bill passed a few days ago, 73, I was just looking, 73 to 20-something. I voted against it, and the simple reason I voted against it is because I represent 80,000 people right here in the town, and there is not a single family farm within my limited geographic area, and the county as well. I'm not sure if the town took an official position, but the county, Fairfax County, as well as VACO and VML and others had some concerns about some of the preemption on some of their own safety and noise ordinances and such. But let me also explain this. That bill, Orrock's bill this year, is what we like, in politics we call them camels. Camels are a horse that came out as a result of a committee. So the idea was to create one animal, but because so many people got in the middle of it, you ended up with another animal, and that's what we ended up voting for. The Orrock bill has its origin last year to the Lingenfelder bill. Scott Lingenfelder had a bill in, which was well known as the Bonita bill, which was a woman named Bonita, Martha Bonita, who was pushing to have not Bonita, but Bonita, who was pushing to have she had an issue on her farm, was it Fauquier County, I think it was? Yeah, she had an issue on her farm where she wanted to sell some homemade jelly and this and that, along with some furniture that wasn't from her farm, but she happened to buy some furniture and she wanted to have this big sale. And the county said, no, you can't have all these sales because all of a sudden it's basically like a garage sale in your farm. And if you want to sell your farm products, great. But if you want to sell things that aren't from your farm, then you're really doing a retail business. To which her argument was, but the chairs are made of wood, and wood is a farm product, therefore I should be able to sell it. That's how this whole issue started. And my friend Scott Lingenfelder last year, who was running for Lieutenant Governor of Virginia, wanted to turn this into a, going back to freedom, Tea Party freedom issue. So he held a press conference and a big rally with his friends from the Tea Party and made this into their cause. And as a result, a bill came to the General Assembly. All of us had to vote for it. I voted against it. And it was very egregious. It basically said the counties have no authority to regulate this, period. So the bill didn't go anywhere. They ended up doing a study, so they went back. They formed a working group. As a result, a year later, this bill came up. It's not quite where it was. And I'll tell you, I support the concept. I actually had a bill last year that most people were surprised that I carried it, to deal with farm wineries and to allow for farm wineries to be able to have events like social hours and such to sell their wine after 5 p.m. on a summer day, because right now the restriction was they had to be done at 5. And if you're living in Fairfax County and you want to go with your family down to a local winery to have an afternoon evening, you can't get there by 5 o'clock. And so we thought that was onerous. The county said, no, we have jurisdiction. So my bill would have allowed for them to open until 9 p.m. and allow for more freedom of enjoying your farm. So I'm not against family farmers. My concern was that the way this bill came up and the history I just told you and the compromise, nobody was satisfied with it. And there were some things I wanted to see in this bill. As a result, it may or may not pass this year, but we'll be revisiting this issue over and over again. And as a member of the Ag Committee, I'll be involved with these conversations. So I did vote against it, but mainly because the Fairfax County folks were still nervous about the extent of how far this bill went. But I'm happy to work with them to see if we can fix that problem.
I never do this, but I do have to get the last word. I love Mark to pieces, but I disagree with him on this. Let me just point out, agriculture is a different business, okay? It's not the same as a regular retail business. And growing your own products and selling your own products is just different. And you're already under the jurisdiction. If you have a winery, by the way, you're under the jurisdiction of ABC. You try getting an ABC license, that is no duck walk, okay? So there's a lot of state regulations you're already under. And while I support local governments and I love my local officials, there are some times where you just got to say, you know what, we've already got 4 or 5 layers of government on this industry. That's enough. And so anyways, that was why I did what I did, but we differ, and that's vive la différence. Okay. You didn't know I spoke French, did you? All right. What's it? Funny guy. All right. All right, City of Fairfax. Why don't we get John, and then we'll stick around. We'll stick around as long as you want.
I've lived in Vienna since 1974, so I consider myself a veteran. So I'm also the founder of SALT, Social Action Linking Together. And my question, and I urge your support for something called Ban the Box, and it's coming up tomorrow, as a matter of fact, in the Senate. But this disqualifies people from, even though they may be the best qualified for the job, from consideration because they have prior conviction. And so you can't ask on the application whether they have a prior conviction. And this way they get, if they're the best qualified, they get interviewed and then called in for an interview, and then they can be asked in the interview. But this is to avoid screening them out before they even get a chance to be considered. So.
Okay, what industries are we talking about, John?
Well, there's two different versions of the bill. One on the House side, Krupika, is his was limited to state employees, but I don't think there's any such limitation on the Senate bill, which is McEachin's bill, which will come up tomorrow.
Okay, I'd have a hard time voting for that because
Okay.
there's some times when that's information you need to know on the front end. But anyways, I will keep an open mind and we'll see what it says.
Well, we would ask that you do that. I have another question, and it's hard for me to imagine, but that this bill would even be considered. But they're bringing back the electric chair.
I saw that. I'm going to vote against that.
Okay, thank you. And thirdly, how is the transfer of power going in the Senate?
It's going great. All righty. George, you get the last word, and then, like I said, we'll stick around as much as y'all want.
Thank you, Chad. Yeah, I am not an educator. I have done some commercial training in years past. I guess I know you folks are going through a major look now at the SOLs, which I think really need to be looked at. One of the concerns I have, I believe it was Delegate Krupika mentioned when I was down the other day, talking about authentic assessment. I think that concerns me a little bit because as I understand authentic assessment, again, I'm not an educator, I have family members who are, we're talking kind of portfolio and other things that people have done. That kind of flies in the face of STEM. And I think in this area where we surround Tyson's Corner and out the 28 corridor, that we need not to have the authentic assessment. We need to be focused more on STEM for science, technology, and that type of thing.
What is authentic assessment, George? I've never heard that before.
Talk to Krupika. Okay. It's.
There's a gentleman in the back there.
This was put in by Fairfax County. It actually then got over to the state of Virginia. It went in during Bush II's thing with the Secretary of Education, who said no, she didn't want it. It's for people that can't speak English well, and it's a way for them to project what their knowledge is of many different subject matters. Sitting down one-on-one, they put together elementary school kids, and they're allowed to do it up to 2 years. They then have to take the SOL in the English language by their third year.
Proxy for the SOL?
Correct. For kids that are first, second, or actually third grade, fourth grade, just coming over here, first year in the school system, they ask them to do some mathing. They can't read what there's directions and that kind of stuff on the exam itself.
I guess one of the concerns I have is what I'm hearing going on right now is you're going to prep the kids for taking the SOLs. And it's gotten to be where it's more rote, some of the teachers know kind of what's in there on some of the questions and what have you, and they give them to the kids. And rather than have the kids just doing rote, I think we need to go into make our SOLs so that they're a little more thought provocative so that the kids can have some more understanding and put that down on paper. Again, I don't write tests. I didn't take testing and measurements when I was doing my undergrad in psychology in college. But I think whenever it needs to be looked at, you need to make sure that all the players are in the room and that you look at just how this SOL is going to be brought up to speed in the future. Thank you.
Okay, I'll just address it really quickly because I know this is one area, and maybe this is a nice way to wrap up today. SOL reforms, standard of learning that all of us know as parents and as people who've gone to school here. SOL reform is definitely one of the few bipartisan, nonpartisan get everybody together and let's come up with a consensus type of an issue. It may not happen this year only because the General Assembly just started and we're almost halfway through already where these bills haven't really been stewed. Also because the governor, Terry McAuliffe, who campaigned on this, along with Attorney General Cuccinelli as well, he talked about this as well. The governor hasn't quite announced what he wants to see happen, and the Secretary of Education, Ann Holton, who happens to be a former daughter of a governor, she is engaged in this. The way my guess is, as an education committee member, what I've been told is that they're starting to look at these issues now, but chances are we're not going to have a major reform this year. We're just going to tee up some of these issues and have a lot of conversations along the way. And with the State Board of Education, they just appointed 2 new members on that board, or one happens to be a good friend of mine, who's going to be engaged on these issues. So they're going to have new members on the Board of Education, new secretary, new governor. All of us are engaged. What we want to do now is get your feedback, exactly what you just talked about. I just learned about this authentic issue that I didn't know about. So we need to hear from all of you as parents and as homeowners and everybody else who are stakeholders in our future of our kids. Let's start working and hearing from each other. So, and I'll start sending you some emails as soon as I get more details on what's going to happen. But my guess is that this is going to happen outside of the General Assembly for the next few months. And then when we come back next year, we'll have a package. So I'm going to announce that we'll have an education town hall at some point. Okay, let's do something maybe around the spring or summer once the kids are out of school. Maybe we can have a conversation with all of our school board members and all the experts, people that actually know something about education, unlike me. And so let's get everybody in the room and let's have a conversation so that we can be ready for a major reform that happens next year. With that, I'm going to wrap up by saying thank you. I'm going to give this over to Chap as well. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And we'll stick around and we'll see you as soon as, and please sign up to get our email and sign up outside so that we know who is here, so we can make sure that we can communicate with you.